Now, would you like me to begin?
Yes, just hold on. All right, everybody, good evening and welcome to today's session. I hope you guys had a great time at work, and for entrepreneurs, I hope you had a great time at your businesses today. So today we have our guest speaker series, and we are having um, Kelvin from the US, and Kevin has incredible experience in social enterprise, business, and of course, working in the educational sector and in the professional sector, if I may say, in diverse countries too. So this session, I know it will be very, very enriching. I've worked with Kevin for a couple of years, and I always learn a lot anytime that he sends me a document or we talk during a meeting. So get your pens, get your notepad, and be ready. Remember, it's a 1 hour session from his part for his presentation, and we have the remaining part of the class to ask thoughtful questions and learn as much as we can from his incredible experience as a lecturer, as a professional in diverse areas. All right, Kevin, you're up.
Thank you very much, Joybert. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon here from the United States. I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and for your attention today. As you can see on the slide in front of you, today's presentation is about product development. Specifically, it's about the process of bringing a product to market and the nuances of building a strong business model around your product ideas. As we're going to discuss in this presentation, product development and ideation is rightfully thought of as a very nuanced exercise. It's an exercise in need-centered design thinking. So in this presentation, we are going to propose and outline a very specific customer-centric approach to developing products and building effective business models around those designs. Okay, so to introduce myself very briefly, and I will be very brief here. As Joybert mentioned, my background is as a professor in the field of international development. My work focuses on developmental economics, social entrepreneurship, as well as micro-enterprise and microfinance. On top of teaching, I do engage in a lot of NGO work among several organizations, including, and very proudly, COSDEF group with Joybert. So on behalf of COSDEF, I consider it an honor and a privilege to be before you this evening as your presenter. And I'll be looking forward to a very productive conversation. Let's begin. All right, so that being said, this is a presentation on product development. And in the course of the time given, I know I have approximately an hour. So we'll discuss the nuances of product ideation and business model development. Here we go. So this presentation is going to proceed according to 5 key objectives, which you can see on your slide. The first is to outline and present a set of guiding principles for successful entrepreneurship at the startup level. Building on that, we intend to present a case for a design-based, values-centered approach to product design and business model ideation. Third, to delineate tools and methods to streamline the product design process. Fourth, to outline principles and methodologies for building strong and financially viable business models around the products that you've designed or that you're thinking of designing. And finally, we will briefly explore some of the opportunities for product creation that are being brought about by what we're calling the post-pandemic economy. And I'll get into a little bit about what that means and what that looks like towards the end of this presentation. Let's scroll down here. As preface to our main discussion, I'd like to take a moment to outline a few essential business principles that are intrinsic not just to the entrepreneurial process, but specifically to product development and the process of designing your business model. So that brings us to our first general principle, which is the idea of creating value for your customers here. When doing business in any developing country, you need to first respect the fact that your customers are going to be extremely sensitive to price. but not just price. Specifically, they're sensitive to the ratio of value they get for the price that they pay. In certain parts of the country, your customers may not have very much in the way of disposable income. So that means they may not have much willingness or ability to pay for even an essential product unless they get a lot of value for the little bit that they're being asked to spend. Moreover, the value of their spending needs to be both significant and immediate in order to convince them to buy it from you. And this is why the key to business success in most sectors is to create value and to solve problems. To put this in very simple terms, if customers buy because your business has value, then the best way to create value is to present your company, your product, your enterprise as the solution to the problems that they're having. This requires you to take a design-centered approach in developing your business. You essentially start with your customer's problem, the needs that they have, the needs that are not being met, and you design your business model around what it is that you're able to do to either solve their problem or improve their situation. We'll talk a little bit about those elements in a little bit. Our second fundamental principle, very closely related to the first, is understanding your customer profile, basically knowing your customer. In order to create and optimize value for your customers, you really have to understand them. Research tells us that in a successful enterprise, the majority of customers are going to have a roughly similar profile. That means a set of common traits like age, like gender, perhaps occupation, income level, lifestyle, industry, etc. But they're going to have a lot of things in common with each other. And your job as the entrepreneur is to understand your customer's profile and to design your business model around them and the needs that they have. In a lot of successful enterprises, especially in developing countries, research tells us that founders take a personal stake in trying to gauge demand. In many cases, they did interviews and focus groups among community members to get a stronger understanding of their customers. Now, I'll acknowledge that not every community will be able to do it easily, but if you in your community are in a strong position to do so, it's something that we encourage. And there are two reasons why. The first is that there is an extremely simple relationship between customer knowledge and business performance. To make it complex, I did very simple. We find that the better you know your business, all things being equal, the higher you're going to perform. The second reason, closely related, is that investigating the needs of your customers is good marketing. Once your business launches, because you took the time to investigate your customers, to ask them what they valued, you have recognition in the community that you're serving. They know your face, they know your name, they know your brand. This gives you a strong brand to start with, and it can be the difference between success and failure. Now, I will acknowledge that this is not a presentation on branding, but I will say, for the sake of saying it, that branding is an extremely important element of any successful business. And your brand is almost as important as the product that you develop. So that's always something to keep in mind. A third principle, which we'll speak about briefly, is the idea of product development in a network. In an impoverished community, in a rural community, especially one that doesn't have access to outside investment, one of the most valuable resources that an entrepreneur has is the network that they cultivate. And this is particularly true when it comes to resource sourcing. Product development, it doesn't just happen. You need to acquire resources. You need to acquire stock. You need to acquire things to make the product and enough of it that you can make a profit, be productive. And this is one of the areas, one of many areas where your business network becomes a substantial asset here. It is often the case that resources, including, but going well beyond funding, are not always available to the individual entrepreneur because of costs, because of access, because of related issues. But sometimes resources that are not available to an individual may be available to a group, to a collective. And this is most readily seen when it comes to product sourcing and material acquisition. That means getting the tools that you need to make the products that you'll ultimately be selling. As you'll see on the slide, research tells us that when all else is kept equal, group enterprises, that means cooperative enterprises, almost always perform an individual enterprise, and they usually last longer. And this is because of its ability to manage costs and acquire resources at the same time. Well, let's move on to our fourth principle here. Okay, so our fourth principle here, production at a doable scale. In my teaching, my regular teaching, we like to refer to this as the doability doctrine. And it means that when it comes to product development, as well as most other aspects of your business, it is useful to plan and structure your business model around what is doable today, as opposed to what you want to do in the future. In the developing world, the trend in businesses is that growth tends to start off on a very, very small scale, but then it gets bigger over time. The point here is that entrepreneurship is a process, and that process begins with what you have and what you can do now. Entrepreneurs rightly are always interested in talking about growth, funding, and expanding what they have. And that's understandable. Indeed, there is a point in the process of entrepreneurship where that is an appropriate conversation to have, and another point where it's a necessary conversation to have. But that process, which culminates in you receiving investment, that builds to you being able to expand your business, it begins with a first step. And you have to take that first step where you are. And that's an important thing to keep in mind when it comes to product development. That being said, the principles that we've outlined so far, I've made an effort to try and relate them specifically to developing new products. But I should say at the outset that these are applicable to multiple aspects of the product development process. That means it's good for product development, but it's also good for brand development. It's good for budget management. It's good for business model development, multiple aspects of your business. So before we get into the details of a specific process, I wanted to outline those principles because they will serve you in other topics and in other areas as well. And we can talk about their implications, what they mean, as we go through the details of how to bring a product into the market. So with the time that is available to us, let's dive a little bit more into the specifics of product development and ideation. The points that I've made so far tend to apply broadly to entrepreneurship in general, but I want to focus on how to make business models out of your ideas. So let's move forward in that. So on your slide here, you have a series of different ways that entrepreneurs throughout the developing world, in Africa specifically, have identified ideas for their own businesses. So we actually did a survey of entrepreneurs, a Pan-African survey from Nigeria to Kenya, and as many places in between as we could get. And these were some of the responses that they turned in. What were the ways they used to identify business ideas? Now, among the methodologies that are presented here, I'm most recommending a customer conscious research-based approach. That's this fourth point here, identifying a gap in the market and coming up with an idea to service that gap. This is the one that we most recommend. It generated the most successful businesses out of all the responses we received. And in that respect, the product that you're making through this method should be thought of in one of two ways. Either way number one, your product is the solution to your customer's problem, or B, it is a source of value that they can't find among your competitors. So to put this in very simple terms, the strength of the product that you're proposing to make, as well as its long-run potential for profitability, all of that is rooted in the value proposition of your product and in the uniqueness of your market position. So it's not enough that your product is intrinsically valuable in a way that your customer is willing to pay for, but it also needs to be valuable in a way that is uniquely yours. Essentially, what is it that you can offer when it comes to this product or service that a potential competitor may not be able to? We'll come back to that idea towards the end of this presentation as well. So here we see an overview of ways to refine your ideation techniques. A functioning business model basically forms at the intersection between your talents, between the customer needs, and an effective distribution channel. So that process accordingly can be simplified into a few basic steps. Identify the target market, establish the value proposition vis-a-vis their needs. And then you need to find an effective, low cost and efficient way to get your idea into the hands of your customer. So those three steps are summarized by the points that you see on this screen here. We will dive further into the next couple slides. So with all that being said, product development is somewhat of a complex process. And we need to understand that product development is not actually complete until you have a cost-effective business model that has been built around it. So this necessitates developing a channel to both build brand awareness and to get the product into the customer's hands in a way that does not deplete your resources. So that's going to involve 4 key considerations here, which are shown on your screen. The first of which is your business plan, which is an essential part of many stages of your business. In other words, you have your product, you know what it is that you need to sell, but what you need is one, an identification of your beneficiary demographic. You need an efficient way to get to them. You need a way to reach as many of them as possible, and you need to do so at the lowest possible cost. So these are all elements that are touched upon when it comes to a business plan here. And what it essentially does is it sets objectives and strategies for achieving those goals. The second point, one that we all know about, is resource acquisition. And this is the area where entrepreneurs run into a lot of difficulty. When I say resources here, I'm most specifically talking about raw materials, labor, the things that you need in order to produce the product itself. A lot of entrepreneurs tend to think investment and funding when it comes to resource acquisition, and that's important. It absolutely does need to be addressed at a certain point. But we're referring to the actual logistics of production, as well as the logistics of getting it to the customer. Funding can assist and certainly expedite that process, but you need to have a plan for that before the funding comes. We'll talk about that as well. Third is an official strategy for actually launching your business. What is the name of your company going to be? How are you going to make your product known to your customer? Are you going to use ICT for marketing or for logistics or for anything else? And where are you going to be? And then finally, of course, there is growth and development into a mature venture. What is your plan for expanding? How will you be able to reach more people with the product that you have? How will you be able to acquire more customers? So this is the end goal of the product development process. Let's move forward a bit. So having said all that, the main question at hand is what exactly does a proper business model entail? And how do we go from I want to sell what I make to the nuances of a business model here? This basically fills in the logistical steps between I have this talent, I have this ability, I have these resources, and getting those resources into customers' hands in a way that causes them to profit here. So what I want to do is briefly go through the components of a standard business model. Okay, so to do that, I would like to introduce a set of tools that we like to refer to when we teach as the marketing mix. In US universities, where I happen to work, when we teach about product development, professors always like to present this as a set of tools. This is a set of steps, tactics, strategies, and considerations that are used to give the entrepreneur a competitive market position. This is basically an outline of all the considerations that need to be made when you develop a product and try to figure out the logistics of getting it to market. And there are four basic elements which we'll go through. There's product, place, price, and promotion. Most business models are going to be going to encompass decisions across a combination of these elements. So we will briefly go through some of those right now here. Okay, so these are the actual elements around which any business model is going to be made, to be based. And obviously the first among them is the product itself. So this refers to the mechanism that satisfied the needs or wants of a specific beneficiary population. So that can either be a product or it can be a service. Once that is established, we have to talk about price. There's more to price than one may think. Most of you, when I said price, you likely thought that this refers to the price that's paid, which is true, but there are a lot of decisions that are rooted in pricing. Mainly, it measures not only how much your consumers value your product, but it also determines how much you as the business owner can potentially profit. So pricing is a major decision that has to be made, and we'll talk about that shortly. The third element is place, which is a blanket term that refers to the nuances of product distribution. In other words, what are the decisions and considerations that have to be made to get the product from your workshop into the hands of a final buyer? So these include channel selection, the logistics of transport, inventory, location selection, as well as a few other things. And finally, there's promotion. Because you as the entrepreneur cannot derive a profit if the customer isn't aware of your product. So there are a set of decisions that have to be made in terms of how are you going to articulate awareness of the needs that your product services. So I'm going to make this a little bit larger here. Slide 17. So when you develop a business model, each of the aforementioned components requires a key set of decisions, and that's what the chart that I've made here, I apologize if you're not able to see it well, attempts to convey. So there are a set of decisions related to the product itself that we'll go through, a specific set of decisions when it comes to price determination, as well as distribution and marketing itself. These are outlined here. A lot of these decisions at every stage are actually part of the design process itself. And they can make the difference between a successful business and an otherwise good idea that doesn't necessarily work. So for example, consider the third element, place, which concerns itself with distribution. In markets with similar goods, things like food, perhaps, textiles, and apparel, sometimes the differentiating factor between two well-positioned startups is that one has a better distribution mechanism. To put it simply, this is the stage of product development where most entrepreneurs actually my house, my shop, into your hands as the customer. So those who manage to lower their costs while at the same time maximizing their reach, they tend to do better. Consider another example to refine our point here. And that deals with the product itself. When it comes to essential goods, so think, for example, food, think textiles and apparel, there's often not a lot of significant variation between one product and another, one seller and another. So this means that the key to an optimal product design is a principle that we like to call value differentiation. Simply put, if most of the sellers in the market are making similar goods or even the same good, how is it that you can make your product stand out in its design? Perhaps the difference can be in production quality or in the speed or efficiency in which you're able to do it. In other words, I'm able to produce it faster than a competitor or at a higher standard than a competitor. Perhaps the difference is in how the product may be packaged, or it may be modified to suit a slightly different audience. So for example, if I make clothing or apparel, I may serve a particular group. I may serve women. I may serve people who are bigger and taller. I may serve someone who is less skinny, for example. So these are ways that I can take a product and adapt it to serve a beneficiary population that competitors are not. And ultimately, this is a source of value differentiation that a lot of people use. In other words, I can modify my product to reach either a wider demographic, or I can target a niche group, a tiny population, in a way that my competitors cannot. But these are all crucial considerations as well. So even though in the abstract, these four issue areas may seem like they're very different, they're all part of the product design process. When you design it, while keeping your customers' needs in mind. When you consider your pricing strategy, you have to consider, one, how much it costs you to actually produce the product, and two, the amount that your customer is willing to pay. Low prices are competitive, but equally, if the price is too low, you'll never be able to cover the cost of actually making it, which means that your business will eventually lose profits and have to shut down. Places about distribution. Where will it be easiest? If I locate in perhaps a certain corner of a semi-urban area, that means most of my customers are easier to reach and they cost me less than transport. If I use e-commerce, for example, I may be able to reach parts of the city or some of the rural populations that I may not otherwise have access to physically. All different things to keep in mind. And finally, there's promotion as well. So whom are you going to promote the product and how? If I'm reaching older consumers or younger consumers, the way that you want to approach product promotion is going to differ drastically depending on which demographic is most profitable. So let's move forward here. Okay, so at the time that we have left, I was given an hour to produce this, and I wanted to make sure to get through that with plenty of time for questions here. So in our final part, I want to talk about developing products in new markets, and specifically opportunities for what we refer to as a post-pandemic economy. So let's do that here. Now, that being said, I want to begin by defining post-pandemic economy because, as we all know, the pandemic is very much ongoing. In a lot of countries, both developed and developing, are experiencing third and fourth waves of the virus and shutting down again. So when I say post-pandemic economy, what I mean is that global supply chains, we've been going through the pandemic long enough that most countries and the global economy itself has been able to adapt to disruptions in supply, to adapt in periodic lockdowns in one country or another. So this means that while there are still many economic challenges to be confronted, we have largely moved on from the same economy of the global lockdown to one that is more open and more resilient than it has been in the past year. Moreover, all relevant data at the macro level, that means from the UN and the World Bank, are telling us that most countries, their economies are adapting to the remaining challenges of the pandemic. So as we globally transition from a state of locked down, closed markets to resilient and more open markets, a lot of opportunities are slated to come about, to be brought about here. And I'd like to briefly go over some of those opportunities here. Okay, so generally speaking, now keep in mind, we're referring mostly to developing countries here. After some research into the economic impacts of the pandemic, we discovered that in the long run, as the world adapts to COVID, as supply chains begin to open up again, as international trade resumes its, or at least gets closer to pre-pandemic levels, we find that there are certain sectors, globally speaking, that are positioned to do well. And those are displayed here on your screen here. I'll read through them. Obviously, food is one of them. Financial technology is another. ICT is one, which we'll talk about soon. And in Cameroon specifically, we discovered a few here. The tropical fruit sector, we've noticed that pre-pandemic production levels have been rising and have shown resilience to the political situation, even as other sectors had shown decline or collapse. Also, locally based delivery of essential items, that skyrocketed during the pandemic, and we don't see indications based on the numbers that that's going to stop anytime soon. And then, of course, there has been substantial startup growth since the lockdowns have lifted. That being said here, each of these sectors, they stand out because they're widely considered to be what we call essential goods. In other words, they are so essential that the demand for them is impressively resilient to changing economic conditions, and they have very low price elasticity, which means that compared to goods in other sectors, the demand for these products is less sensitive to changes in the economy or price level. That means even if the economy falters, the demand for them is not going to change significantly, and customers will pay more for these kinds of products than for others. So that brings us to a question here. What is the relationship between the COVID economy and our task of product development? We've spent this presentation, and I would assume that you've spent earlier sessions today talking about the nuances of how to bring your products to market. And what I want to encourage you briefly is to consider applying some of those ideas, some of those principles to opportunities that the economy is positioning itself to create. So that is the goal here. Simply put, if we understand that product ideation begins with filling a need, then when we understand the local economy, we find that any gaps in the supply chain, any gaps in the value chain, those are opportunities for you as entrepreneurs, and they're extremely profitable. But there is, of course, a process in doing so, which is what we wanted to talk about. So as we discussed, as Cameroon's economic situation begins to improve, there are certain things that need to be done to take advantage of those opportunities. And one of them is an idea that we like to refer to as product prototyping to achieve market penetration. And that is right here. So basically what this means is that this is the principle of what we call the minimal viable product. And it ultimately means that you test your product with a pilot group on a small scale. So if you're using food, for example, before you start thinking about widespread distribution and selling, have your family and your friends try it. If you're in the textile sector or the apparel sector, get your family or your friends to both try the clothing and to model it. If the test goes well, the feedback that they offer, the testimony that they can be offered, gives you a sense of how to market your product, because you see what the value is. You can even use their testimonies in reaching out to other people in your project pitch. Moreover, if the test reveals that there are modifications needed, that you could perhaps, that your product needs improvement, then it is less costly to do so, versus launching on a wide scale only to find, after your profits are low, that your product needs to be modified. So prototyping is not only low-cost market research for you as the entrepreneur, but it also gives you the opportunity to get a sense of how your product is going to do without incurring what we call sunk costs. Those are costs that cannot be repaired from profits, that will be permanently lost. So prototyping is a wise way to approach new market penetration and new opportunities. The goal, ultimately, is that you would want to modify your product over time to suit changing market conditions. But that requires a few things on the part of the business owner. In order to maximize market penetration, you as the entrepreneur will need to monitor your sales and need to monitor trends in your customers, trends in the number of customers, the demographic. Are they women? Are they men? Are they young? Are they old? And what feedback are they giving? Also keep in mind production costs and other things that affect the price that you have to charge them. By keeping track of these things, you're able to continually refine your product so that sales never decline. One second here. So I'm hoping you can see this as well. Generally speaking, products have what we call a life cycle. And as a concluding thought, I want to present for your consideration an illustration of how most products eventually mature over time. This chart projects the average revenue that a single product generates over time. So time is down here and sales are this way. So you'll notice that over time, you'll notice that as time goes on, revenue tends to go down. So this line here represents revenue. And after a certain point, the further out you are from the product launch, the less revenue it takes in. This progression towards the end of a product's life cycle implicitly represents a decline in value that it brings to your customer. In other words, as time goes on, without changes, without keeping track of market conditions, you're going to find that customers derive less and less value from a product. And as they derive less value, it's going to attract fewer customers. And that's going to lead to falling sales and lower profits. And eventually, the business is going to stop profiting. That's represented by the decline stage here. Once your product reaches this point, and most products do, your business has really two choices. You either have to introduce a new product or you have to modify what's there in order to remain in profit, okay? And this is the rationale behind my suggestion of prototyping. This is my rationale behind basing your business around what your customer values. Basically, what we'll find here is that if you're keeping track of your customer feedback, of your sales volumes, of trends in the customers that you have, such as their demographic, their age, their number, their response, how much they spend, what this allows you to do is to keep track of the needs, the evolving needs of your target beneficiary. And as you do so, you can keep your production in line with what they need and in line with what they value. And the result of that is that you get to continually extend the growth phase of your product. So the growth phase is here. You'll notice that sales increase, unit sales increase, general profits increase, your customer base grows, and competitors begin to lose out. So this is where a lot of the principles of differentiating your product, optimizing value, presenting the highest value at the lowest cost to your customer begins to show dividends for you as the business owner. The more in tune you are with the needs of your customer, the longer you are able to extend the life cycle of your product. So that being said here, I know I'm coming on the closing end of my hour, so I want to bring just a few set of concluding thoughts before I answer questions. I do realize that time has been set aside for the moderator as well as for you to ask me questions as the presenter, which I welcome. But I'd like to start by asking questions to all of you, especially those of you who are either involved in entrepreneurship now or who are considering entrepreneurship at some point in the future. All right. So these are things that you need to think about for yourselves in developing your products and in modifying your products to reach the largest possible customer base. So the first question, and you can think to yourself, which population group is in the best position to benefit from my products? In other words, who is your best customer? Who is your most profitable customer? Okay. Second, what is the value of your product to them? So from their perspective, what is the value proposition of the product that you're developing? And each of you are going to have a different answer for that. Let's keep that in mind. Something else to consider, what ideas have you tried and how far along the way are you? In a moment, I'm going to give you a tool that will help you to answer that question for yourself. Number 4 is about logistics and efficiency. Now, what is the most efficient way for you to bring your ideas to your market? What is the least expensive way? And can you think about ways that you can make that process less expensive? And finally, the ultimate question, the question that the entire entrepreneurship process hinges upon is this last one here. What can I do or what can I make from what's available to me now? Entrepreneurship often begins very small, as we've mentioned before. But ultimately, the entire process, from business planning to seeking investors to strategic planning, acquiring customers and maximizing profits, then hiring labor, it's an extensive process, but it all begins from where you are. What is it that I can do, make, or provide from what I have? And what value will my customers derive from that? This is the question that every entrepreneur has to ask themselves at some point, because every other step, every other topic is ultimately going to hinge upon this last one. So with that, there's one last thing that I would like to present you all here. Okay. Hopefully you're able to see this. And I'll explain what this is and its potential value to you. I know I have a very short time to be in front of you, and I'm going out of my way to make time for the questions. But this is something that I hope that each of you can take away in terms of your own entrepreneurship. And I'll walk you through what this is. When we teach about product development in the classroom, professors will almost always have students fill out this chart at some point during the course. Any university, any secondary school in my country where we teach about entrepreneurship, if you're thinking about it, you will eventually fill this chart out. Not only that, a lot of investors in my country, they want to see this chart. They won't even consider investing if you can't show a completed version of this chart. So it's worth going through. As you can see, this is called the lean canvas. It's a business model outline, and its purpose is to help the entrepreneur see and assess their own readiness to bring the product to market. In other words, if you find for your own business that you are able to fully answer each of the questions here, then that means that your product might be ready for market introduction, and you should begin the planning process on how to do it. That means that you should focus less on product design and more on price strategies, more on market strategies, more on distribution logistics, and what is the cheapest and most effective way to get your product from your hands to the hands of a buyer. Equally, if you're not able to completely answer this chart, then it gives you a sense of what it is you need to work on, and perhaps what aspects of your product need to be redesigned in order to achieve readiness for market structure. And that's what this chart tells you. So I can go through a few of them briefly before taking my seat, so to speak. Some of the terminology here, when it says problem, they're mostly referring to the problem of your customer. In other words, what is it that the customer needs but doesn't have? If you're in the textile sector, you may say, I can't find clothes that fit my size, for example. Or you may say that you don't have, or maybe I don't have access to mobile finance or other services. Solution refers to what it takes to solve that problem. Metrics just means how are you going to measure how good you do in solving your customer's problem. The idea here is that you need to track your progress. So you need an evaluative protocol to know if you're doing a good job. So this means you're going to track profit, you're going to track sales, you're going to track number of customers, and you're going to track the number of people who your marketing can reach. Value proposition, that's here. This means what's special about your product, and what is it about your product that consumers would want to buy it. Once again, each of you will have a different answer, but every business doesn't need an answer. Unfair advantage refers to value differentiation. Because in a lot of markets, again, essential services, textiles, food, apparel, some leisure goods, a lot of entrepreneurs in the market are going to be making very similar. If you and I are both making textiles, there may be something about what I'm producing that you're not producing. So just because we're doing the same, we're in the same sector or even making the same goods, doesn't mean we're making the same business. So the question here is, what's special about yours that your competitors don't have? And I would encourage everybody in the planning process, think about that. In order to be successful in a saturated market, any entrepreneur needs a unique point of value differentiation, whether it's a small point or a major point, or even whether it's the product itself. Focus your planning and your marketing around What is it that makes your product special? Because that's what your consumers will ultimately be buying. Customer segment just means who is your beneficiary, which is the beneficiary population that is best served by your product and that is most willing and able to pay for your product too. Cost refers to what is it going to cost to produce the product as well as get it to market. And revenue streams refers to how many different avenues are available for you to receive profit. In other words, the more customers you have and the more customer groups you have, the more streams of revenue that there are. So you should have a plan in place for achieving as much profit as possible. That being said, this is meant as a tool. And if it's asked of me, I'll certainly send a copy of this to Joybert so he can give to anybody who wants it, to anybody who feels that they could benefit from it. The point of this chart here is a readiness tool so that you as the entrepreneur can decide and see for yourselves, what are the strengths of my product design? What are the weaknesses of my product design? And am I ready to take my product to the market? If you're able to fill out this chart and answer every one of its questions, then it's very likely that you might be at or near readiness to begin entering the market. And certainly other presenters will be able to help you achieve those ends. So that being said, I'm going to leave this here. Some of you may be writing this down. Some of you may be taking a screenshot of that. You're welcome to use it. This is a standard tool that business coaches and professors use. I'm going to leave this here for the time being. If anybody wants a copy of it, I'll ask Joybert to let me know. I'll send it to him. So that being said, I want to thank you very much for your time and for your attention today. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have, whether on this or on the implications of anything that I've gone over. I also wish to thank Joybert and COSDEF organization for the honor of addressing you today. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you so much for this incredible session. A lot of vital and special knowledge and information that you have shared with us so far. So from my end, I have two questions. Then the next set will be from the candidates, from the students, and I'm sure they should be writing out their questions down. And just to note, their questions may come in two directions. Some of them are working professionals in other companies, so the questions may be in the direction of what they're going through in the businesses right now, where they work, and how they can implement that maybe under a supervisor who doesn't understand innovation or corporate effectiveness and many other things. And of course, we have entrepreneurs who are working on their own businesses at the moment. So first question is, from your experience in working with students as a lecturer, I'm sure you have come across students who have ideas that they would like to turn into businesses. And from your experience with young social entrepreneurs from Africa to other continents that you must have assisted in the work you do, what do you think they always miss out when it comes to designing a new product or a new business?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that Joybert. There's a very common myth in entrepreneurship that passion generates sales. In other words, a lot of people go through school thinking that if I can make it, somebody's going to buy it. And that's not necessarily true. That tends to result in products that may only appeal to a very narrow demographic, but a demographic that's not big enough to profit from. Or people think that because I have this skill, it must be useful. And even if the skill actually does have value, which it often does, entrepreneurship, when it's successful, has to balance several different competing things. One is obviously what it is that you bring to the table. What skill do you have, whether it's an intellectual skill, whether it's a manual skill, but also the need of your customer. I think we can all speak from personal experience We buy out of scarcity. We buy things because we don't have them. I don't have food in the cupboard right now, so I'm going to the store. I don't have meat, so I'm going to buy meat. So scarcity is what drives the buying decision. So that's the first thing that students often miss. They get so caught up in, I can make this machine, I can make this, and it's awesome, but they fail in the design process to reconcile how great their prototype is with what exactly their customer needs to walk away with. They're buying value before they're buying something cool or innovative or unique. I'd say that's probably the biggest mistake that I've seen among students.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My last question is, you spoke about the doability doctrine, and another way is starting small. Many young people, they wait for a very long time, waiting for the time they're going to have maybe large sums of money, have a perfect idea, or have all they need before they start. What do you think is that biggest challenge that stop young entrepreneurs or even larger or SMEs who want to launch new products or have existing products or want to launch a new product? What do you think is that challenge that stops them from starting small, using the lean model of starting and succeeding?
Well, there are a number of things that can get in the way of that. For what I will say, as a preface to my answer, that in developing countries, especially in the poorest communities, the lean model, even though the start isn't necessarily the most fun, it tends to be the most effective over the long run. Entrepreneurship is often pursued sometimes to make up for shortages in the labor market, sometimes because of dissatisfaction with the employment situation. But the point is, everybody wants the successful stage is great. Everybody wants to be at the, I'll alter the screen here. Everybody likes the growth and maturity stage because this is entrepreneurship that can sustain a family, that can send children to school. And the biggest fallacy is this doesn't happen without massive investment all at once. That if somebody can just invest in me today, all that other stuff, it's going to work out and it's going to be fine. That's not necessarily true. Joy, but I'm sure you're well aware of why that isn't always the case. First reason among many is that investors they're scared of risk. Like they lose out if the venture doesn't work. So they are naturally cautious about doing so without a proof of concept. The other thing that I think really stops people from leaning into the lean model is not understanding the opportunity in the market. A lot of people, as you put it, they're waiting for the perfect conditions. And they think about perfection with respect to themselves, not their market. Perfect conditions means I have enough money. Perfect conditions mean I can hire a team of 10 people. Perfect conditions mean I'm in a good position such that I can introduce this because I have the tools, I have the investor. But that decision leaves out the customer entirely. The market tends to determine the best position. So if I can dive in a little bit deeper to that, what I'm saying is that a good time to start entrepreneurship, it's a balance between, it's a positional determination, meaning it's what the market needs versus my position. So if I can use the experience of my own NGOs, some of the ones that I've worked with, my largest NGO is actually a consulting organization that focuses on fragile and conflict affected states. The market chose us. We had expertise in economics and development and micro entrepreneurship. But the need, in other words, the population that most wanted what we had to offer was in communities that were passed over by investors, that were ignored by others who had similar skill sets. So it is our position versus what the market needs. If I'm in the best position to serve, that means I'm in a good position to start. Even if I start at a small scale, the research shows us that if you have a good match between provider and beneficiary, and you have a wide enough customer base, then over time, profits will be enough that you will start to experience some growth. The issue comes with we're naturally impatient. We want to get to the growth and maturity stage. We don't like the introduction stage because that means having to test assumptions. That means having to prototype a product. Maybe that product doesn't work and I have to replan the activity. That's not necessarily a fun thing to do, and it can be discouraging. So I think that's the issue. If we want to encourage people to lean into that model of entrepreneurship, then we need to, then all of us as mentors and teachers, we need to teach about its long run dividends and how to survive the short run where you may be operating at a small deficit.
Awesome. Thank you so much.